it's Ivy Slater, and you're listening to Her Success Story podcast, a show where gutsy businesswomen share their success journey. Hi, this is Ivy Slater. Welcome to today's episode of Her Success Story. I have a fascinating and amazing woman to introduce you to today. And Abbey Wick and I were connected through my amazing network. You know, I always say I'm incredibly lucky with the network that I have, but it's also a result of the amazing women I have met who continue to introduce me to more amazing women. And you're going to see why I invited Abbey to be on this podcast today. She is a soil scientist. Yes, I did say soil scientist, and global upskilling and outreach program lead for Syngenta Group, the large agricultural technology company. No, listeners, we have not covered this area before, so don't be scratching your head. Is this usual? No, this is a little unusual. She is tasked with developing innovative training programs in the soil health for 60,000 employees and information related to regenerative agriculture for customers in over 100 countries. I could read on and on. You could read it in the notes below, but Abbey is a woman in the know, but she's also an amazing leader, approachable, knowledgeable. She's committed to her personal happiness and freedom, which I find incredibly connecting. I mean, when we chatted, I was like, what do I have in common with the soil scientist? And once we got talking, I knew why the conversation was connected. She's focused on raising her 9-year-old son with profound dyslexia and has an ambitious goal of influencing agriculture in a sustainable way on a global scale. Abbey, thanks for joining me here today.
Thank you for having me.
So I have to ask the obvious question. Soil scientist, where did this come from? I mean, were you raised on a farm? It's okay. Obviously, I would think this was part of your upbringing. Where did it come from? How did this come about for you?
Oh my gosh, that's a great question because I did not grow up on a farm. I did not grow up in an agricultural community at all. But I grew up with very conservation-minded parents. And we spent a lot of time in nature, a lot of time hiking, camping, doing all the things outdoors. And I think that's where really I got excited about conservation, nature, agriculture, sustainability, all of those things.
So you got interested in it. Then what? Because listen, I grew up dancing. I have a huge interest. I'd like to see Alvin Ailey. I like to go to the Abbey, right? Yet there's journeys we go through. So how did this become an interest with the outdoors and to truly becoming a scientist around this? Because I'm incredibly impressed, I have to tell you.
Oh, thank you. I think when I went to school in Colorado at University of Denver, and from there I was going to be a park ranger. Like I was going to work for the National Park Service, give guided tours, all of those kinds of things. And then I realized at one point that if I loved nature so much, that there are all of these human disturbances that happen. There's mining for coal or other resources. There's natural gas. There's agriculture. All of these things that we're doing to the land, and I wanted to be part of the solution. As opposed to maybe one that's just kind of sharing about nature. So that's how I got into mine land reclamation and then into agriculture.
And so how did you start building your career here?
So I started mine reclamation. So I was working on coal mines out west in Wyoming. I did a little bit of work in Montana on abandoned mine lands.
Wow.
Yeah, it was really interesting. I worked with a consultant over the summer and I did a lot of vegetation clipping and a lot of soil sampling. It was really hard work actually, but I'm really glad I did it because it showed me, number one, that I can be a woman in this field and I can be successful, but I can also have a deep appreciation for the kind of work that it takes to get the job done. And so I did a lot of that out west. And then I decided,
was it a male dominated area at that time when you were getting into it? I mean, when you were working the soil, when you were doing these programs, when you were going through schooling for it?
Yeah, for sure. It was mostly men, especially in soil science, because it's considered, I don't want to say a hard science, but it's probably up there with engineering, right? Like it's one of those things that most men enter into soil science and women go into something like ecology. And that feels like a softer science, though it's not. I mean, both are really important sciences. But I was told early on that if I developed a career as a soil scientist and I got trained in that area, that I would have no problem finding a job. And I could bring a lot to the field as well, just through different perspectives. So that's,
I
yeah.
love that.
Yeah, I do too. I think it was a really good message.
And it's a really good message, and it was a great message, and when you got, out and started working, you saw that you were in a male-dominated industry. There's a lot of people that might say, "I need to navigate somewhere else," and what drove you to stay with it?
I think it was that I knew I could have an impact and I knew I could bring a different perspective. And so
What do you mean by a different perspective?
I think that there's something that women do with in the way that we care about the people we work with and the way we care for the land. And it's just a totally different, maybe more nurturing approach and less systematic. And I found that having that approach of being, focused on the people and then on the resource that I could make impact in a really profound way.
So, what happened next? So I know you're a mom, you have a 9-year-old, and I remember you shared a piece of the journey that you started doing consulting, and you started your own company at one point. Where did that come in?
Oh, that came in further down the road. So I feel like I've had a very different path, and maybe a lot of people have had this path, but I went from mine reclamation. I did that in the Western United States. I did that in the Eastern United States. Got interested in agriculture, and then took a university faculty position, and became an associate professor at North Dakota State University. And it was kind of that point that I had a 12-year career there. I had my son during that time.
So you put down your roots.
I put down my roots. When I moved to North Dakota.
When you start saying, like, when you're a professor for 12 years and you have a child, like, that's really putting down your roots, your foundation. It's not a lot of things that change from there.
Oh yeah, yeah. My roots were deep. I was on the pathway from assistant to associate to full professor. I was doing all of the things that were required: the grant writing, the education. The one thing I did a little differently is that I had my son before I got tenure, and so if people know the
Wow.
tenure process at a university, it's like, oh, you don't do anything to rock the boat before you get tenure, and that's 6 years into your career. So I did that a little bit differently, but my roots were down, and I thought that that was where I was going to be for my entire career, until I kind of decided I needed to do more, and that's when I started doing more of the consulting work, and kind of expanding beyond the Northern Plains and sustainability.
So tell me a little bit about when you started doing the consulting work. What was that like for you? And when we think, because I know I was surprised, so I'd love you to share with our listeners. When I think soil scientist consulting work, I'm like, oh, those are probably with a lot of companies I wouldn't know the names of, right?
Right.
And you surprised the crap out of me. I always ask this question: what surprised you? I have to tell you, when we were talking, weeks ago, I was like, I was really surprised.
Yeah, there's so many companies that are tied to agriculture, right? Just because of where they supply their products to make their goods, right? So PepsiCo, Walmart, Unilever, General Mills, King Arthur Baking. Those are all companies that I've been working with, Anheuser-Busch, to help with their sustainability goals related to soil health building practices. So I'm an expert in helping farmers adopt new practices that are conservation minded and around sustainability. And these companies have a need to source their product from areas where farmers are using sustainable practices. So that was a great fit for a soil scientist who likes people.
So what took you up that path? Because I remember, like you said, you're in the boardroom with the top tier leadership of one of those global companies, and you're like, okay, I'm making another shift. And
It
but
was, it was,
that takes guts. It takes guts to do what you have done. And I want to call that out. And I want our listeners to think for themselves, like, how often we do these gutsy moves. And I think it's so admirable. It takes guts to, when you're on a path, to change that path, then to start working with companies that are global names, not local names, global names. You being in top tier boardrooms, and then you make another change. And that's guts. I love it. But what
oh, I'm glad you see it as guts. Sometimes I think it was just, I was kind of trying to figure out where I was going to fit. But at this time too, I was a single mom. I was divorced. I had my son most of the time, and so I was making decisions not just for me, but also for my son. And
makes sense?
And so I think, that the consulting was, I think it could have gone really well. I think I could have done a lot there and continue to meet with board of directors for companies like PepsiCo and help other groups identify their sustainability goals. But I felt like I needed just a little bit more security to be able to raise a son and to give him what he needs. And so when I was actually in New York City going to the PepsiCo board meeting, I got a call from Matt Wallenstein, who's the chief soil scientist at Syngenta Group.
Okay.
And he had told me about this position he had, that it was all about education, upskilling its Syngenta employees. Was I interested in applying for it? And so I'm literally in a taxi cab in New York City taking this call on my way to do consulting work
I
and
have a
thinking about
very
another
clear
job.
visual of this because one day I could tell you a story about how I was in a taxi cab getting like a life-changing call, and I'm like, and we pulled over the side, and the guy's like, "You got to get out." I'm like, "You got to give me a minute." I was like, "Right."
My life is changing right now.
Exactly. You just brought a flashback to me.
Oh my gosh, I love it. So things happen in taxi cabs in New York. It's great, life-changing opportunities. So yeah, I've just always believed that the opportunities come to you when you're doing things that align with your values, that these opportunities will come, and you just have to decide, do they continue to align with my values or not? And if they don't, then it's not the right one. But if it does, then maybe it's the direction you should go. And so yeah, by June of the next year, this is November, I forget what year. And then by June the next year, I was working for Syngenta Group. And yeah, I'm still there. I love it. It's just been a year and a half, but it's been wonderful.
So you said Syngenta Group said something to you early on about values. Let's talk about the values and the values we lead by. And you share in your bio your personal core value of happiness and freedom, which gives you the focus of raising your son. Now, Syngenta Group is another global company.
Yeah, I was nervous because generally global companies you would think are not going to be supportive of that happiness and freedom, right? They want you to produce. They have something that they're creating and selling, and that you need to align your life with that. And I remember during the first conversation I had with Matt as the chief soil scientist about this whole position, I was concerned about the 20% travel because I said I have my son. I'm not willing to compromise time with my son to go on work trips.
Right.
And I was kind of going into depth on it, and in his expression, he goes, wait, just wait a second. He said, I want you to be a mom first and a Syngenta employee second.
And this is in corporate America.
This is in corporate America. And when he said that, and then the company actually backs it up, I was like, this is the job for me. This is the one. So I took it.
It is so refreshing to hear companies who say it and follow through on it, because unfortunately it's not the rep. And you know personally, I always have a problem with what the word on the street is, because I think that tends to get over exaggerated and grouped together, and I don't love hearsay that way. And I always say, but there's so many corporate, but there's so many exceptions. Oh, but being up, and there's so, you have to work 24, and there's exceptions. And, there's this point of view that very often goes negative first in whatever way you're looking at it. And to highlight the positives, I think is so important and underset out there, and that there are great companies with values and respect for working parents. So how have you navigated? Okay, so when did you actually see that motto coming through? Were you skeptical for a while?
So I'm a scientist. So of course I researched it. So he told me this, and I thought,
Okay, so
oh,
we
wait,
had a
wait, wait.
whole hypothesis going on. We had a step-by-step process.
Oh, I did. I looked at all the reports. I looked at how women were rising within the company. Were they being promoted into leadership
God.
positions over time? What were the salaries? Were there discrepancies in salaries? And so I
Brilliant.
looked at all of that because I think oftentimes we don't, right? We take things for face value and we say, okay, well, this is, the first offer is the best, right? Like if they're offering this, it's got to be the best. I know I never negotiated before this position. And it was really empowering to know all of those details about this company, and then to go into the negotiation process and know my value, and then to really, I didn't even have to fight for it, but I knew what I was meant to be paid and how I was supposed to be compensated, and the kind of position I wanted. And I wish more women would do. I wish I'd known that when I was younger, that I had that power to negotiate. But At least I did it once. So.
And you're leaving a message here for other women to raise their awareness around.
Yeah, I think so. I think we undervalue ourselves. I think we're constantly thinking about the things that we need to do to achieve happiness or to achieve success, that we forget about what we've done in the past that's gotten us to this point.
Okay.
And I really like to look at what I've done to get to this point, and then the future will happen, right? There are things that I can do if I stick with my values and I stick with my, my work ethic, the way that I want to do things, continue the relationships, then the future will happen how it's going to happen. And I think that we undervalue ourselves oftentimes, and I would love to see a world where women don't do that.
So how have you navigated and managed the travel commitment? Because your son is 9 now. You
He's
moved, and
9.
he's in a special school that he's doing great in, I hear.
Yes, we just
Oh,
moved.
mom, by the way.
Thank you. He and I just moved 1,200 miles away from his dad, which has been tough on him and something we're navigating. But he's now in a specialized dyslexia school, which, working remotely, I can do that for my son, and that feels amazing. And I actually today I booked my first work trip as a mom full time. I have somebody that's going to stay with him and going to help out, and I'm going to do my first work trip. So the company didn't pressure me. They knew once I was moving that I was a single mom and I needed to, build a community and have time to do that. And so we did. And next month I'll take my first trip for a couple days. So it all works out, right? Things happen just how they're supposed to.
How is this supposed to? So what has surprised you in this journey?
Oh, that's hard to say because I feel like there have been so many surprises.
That might be a better question. What hasn't surprised you in the journey?
Right. I think the biggest, I've just surprised myself, right? I think when I got bold and I opened up the space to do something different, when I was just finally open to it, I just surprised myself with all the things that could happen, and the way that, we always talk about, can you have it all? And I was thinking today just about, I think I do. I think I have it all right now. And by being open and allowing those surprises and those challenges and the insecurities and the, all the things that go with change, to just embrace that and to do it. Yeah, I think I've surprised myself.
I love it. I love it. As we finish up, what would be one piece of advice you might have for other leaders who are navigating their careers, working parenting? What would be your piece of advice on that?
Oh my gosh, it's so different for everybody. So be bold and align what you're doing with your values. And I do this all the time. I come back to my values. What do I want to achieve in my life, and what do I want for my son? And if the things that I'm doing align with those values, then I know I'm going to be successful. I'm going to feel it personally. I think I'm going to radiate it to others. And I'm always going to be doing what I want to do if I align with values. So I think just, don't be scared to make those big moves, but then make sure that they align with the core of who you are, and then you'll be successful.
I think that's brilliant. And I think it's so true. When we truly live by the values that are near and dear to our heart, and our decisions are made based on those values, sky's the limit.
I agree. It is.
As simple as that. Listeners, if this episode was interesting, if you found it valuable, I love that. Share it forward. If you think there's somebody else that would find it interesting, share it with them. Just pass it forward. Hit subscribe. We come into your inbox with great new content like today's interview with Abby every Monday. And I'm going to say stay tuned. We're getting ready for our nonprofit series that's coming up before you know it. During the holidays, this is our 7th year. So this is a big celebration for me. It's our 7th year of doing nonprofit leaders and highlighting and educating around how to give during the holidays as well as receive. So stay tuned for that. And Abby, thank you so much for today. Thanks for hanging out on Her Success Story.
Oh, I appreciate it. It was a wonderful conversation. Thank you.
Stay tuned, listeners. I'll always say, take a breath and think of one thing that was impactful for you in today's conversation. Make a note of it somewhere. It doesn't matter if it's your phone, a piece of paper, whatever that is for you. And then make a decision on one action you can take that will benefit you. And there's your tip today. Have a great one. See you next time.